People of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, and ethnicities, histories, and bodies here. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirits here. We welcome all you are bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome all of you. We extend a special welcome to each guest among us. Guests are warmly invited to attend the inquiry session today immediately after the service in the parlor to learn more about Unitarian Universalism and our church in a smaller, more casual gathering. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you and drop it in the offering plate later in the service. Guests may also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary where folks will also find hearing assist devices and braille hymnals. A fragrance-free area is located on the front right side in the first few pews. If you are a visiting family, including children or youth, after the time for all ages noted in your order of service, please join the children's processional and head across the hall to the common room. There you will be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee, conversation in the common room. My name is George, and you can come talk to me at the guest table there. As a way to engage at First Church, I invite everyone to explore the announcements insert for the numerous opportunities available there. In particular, may I draw your attention to a few? The Chronologically Gifted group holds its final potluck prior to Summer and Max Auto Hall at 12:30 p.m. today. Please join us with or without a dish to share if you consider yourself north of 60. Juliet Hills will present the program on historic women of Milwaukee. Next Sunday, June 2nd, is our multi-generational flower communion. Please bring a fresh flower from your yard or other location to contribute to our flower ceremony. Please find the details on these and more events in the announcements insert. Today we are honored to have a pulpit guest amongst us. The Reverend Tony Larsen recently retired as minister at Olympia Brown Unitarian Universalist Church in Racine. He has written a book entitled Trust Yourself, You Have the Power. Authored a Unitarian Universalist Association curriculum called A Catechism for Unitarian Universalists. Reverend Larsen has most recently accepted a position as part-time minister at Unitarian Church North in Mequon, Wisconsin. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. Once again, I welcome you to First Church by inviting you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. This time I would like to call up Roger and Claire Blau to light our chalice.
The Buddhist teacher Rengetsu taught, if you want to extend the light of the way, let it first illuminate your own heart.
And Hindus pray this prayer from the Upanishad. Let us from ignorance to wisdom, from hatred to love, and from bondage to freedom.
For the light of love here within our hearts and all around us, we kindle this chalice flame. Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing a hymn written by the mother of the wife of the son of a former member of my former church in Racine. Hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses.
Good morning. The story I have for you today, poor guys, this is perfect for my height. The story I have for you today is Everybody Needs a Rock by Bird Baylor. I love this book. I've read it so many times downstairs, and this was my last chance to read it. Everybody needs a rock. I'm sorry for kids who don't have a rock for a friend. I'm sorry for kids who only have tricycles and bicycles, horses, elephants, goldfish, three-roomed playhouses, fire engines, wind-up dragons, and other things like that, if they don't have a rock for a friend. That's why I'm giving them my own 10 rules for finding a rock. Not just any rock. I mean a special rock that you find yourself and you keep as long as you can, maybe forever. If somebody says, "What's so special about that rock?" Don't even tell them. I don't. Nobody is supposed to know what's special about another person's rock. All right, here are the 10 rules. Rule number 1, if you can, go to a mountain made out of nothing but 100 million small, shiny, beautiful, roundish rocks. But if you can't, any place will do, even an alley or a sandy road. Rule number 2, when you're looking at rocks, don't let mothers or fathers or brothers or sisters or even best friends talk to you. You should choose a rock when everything is quiet. Don't let dogs bark at you or bees buzz at you. But if they do, don't worry. The worst thing you can do is go rock hunting when you are worried. Rule number 3, bend over more, even more. You might even have to sit on the ground with your head touching the dirt. You have to look a rock right in the eye. Otherwise, don't blame me if you can't find a good one. Rule number 4, don't get a rock that is too big. You'll always be sorry. It won't fit in your hand right, and it won't fit in your pocket. A rock as big as an apple is too big. A rock as big as a horse is much too big. Rule number 5, don't choose a rock that is too small. It will only be easy to lose, or a mouse might eat it thinking that it was a seed. Believe me, that happened to a boy in the state of Arizona. Rule number 6, the size must be perfect. It has to feel easy in your hand when you close your fingers over it, and it has to feel jumpy in your pocket when you run. Some people touch a rock 1,000 times a day. There aren't many things that feel as good as a rock if it is the perfect rock. Rule number 7, look for the perfect color. That could be that sort of pinkish gray with the silvery streaks in it. Some rocks that look brown are really other colors, but you only see them when you squint and when the sun is shining just right. Another way to see the colors is to dip your rock in a clear mountain stream if one is passing by. Rule number 8, the shape of the rock is up to you. There's a girl in Alaska, she only likes flat rocks. Don't ask me why, because I like the lumpy ones. The thing to remember about shapes is this. Any rock looks good with 100 other rocks around it on a hill. But if your rock is going to be special, it has to look good all by itself in the bathtub. Rule number 9, always sniff your rock. Rocks have their own smells. Some kids can tell by sniffing a rock whether it came from the middle of the earth or the ocean or a mountain or where wind and sun touched it every day for 1,000,000 years. You'll find that grown-ups can't tell these things. Too bad for them. They just can't smell as good as kids can. Rule number 10, don't ask anybody to help you choose. I've seen a lizard pick one rock out of a desert full of rocks and go sit there all alone. And I've seen a snail pass up 20 rocks and spend all day getting to the one that it wanted. You have to make up your own mind. You'll know. All right, that's the 10 rules. And if you think of any more, you'll have to write them down yourself, because I'm going to play a game that takes just me and one rock to play, because I happen to have my rock friend right here. We invite children and teachers to join in singing verse 1 of the hymn and then proceed to class as the congregation sends you on your way. If you could please rise for Children's Recessional Hymn number 44, We Sing of Gold Mornings.
We are sad to light our candle of life in honor of 2 church members who died. We were sorry to recently learn of Daniel Steffen's death, January the 7th, 2019, after a massive heart attack. A memorial service was held on January the 23rd at Church and Chapel Funeral Home in Waukesha. Daniel was 74 years old and a member here since the late 1990s. It seems fitting to light our candle of life in honor of Daniel on Memorial Day weekend, since he served honorably as a Green Beret in the U.S. Army Special Forces. We're also sorry to tell you that Peg Fleury died peacefully with her family gathered around at Freighted Hospital on Saturday, May 18th, following a major stroke. She was 81 years old and a member of our congregation for 26 years. A memorial service will be held Saturday, June 29th at 2 p.m. here at the church with Reverend Dina officiating. Information about charitable organizations for donations in memory of Peg will be forthcoming. As is our custom in this church, whenever we have a birth, an adoption, or a death among our members, we light our candle of life today in honor of Daniel Joseph Steffen and Peg McCormick Fleury.
On this Memorial Day weekend, I pray this prayer from the Reverend Barbara Peskin. Spirit of life, whom we have called by many names in thanksgiving and in anguish, bless the poets and those who mourn. Send peace for the soldiers who did not make the wars, but whose lives were consumed by them. Let strong trees grow above graves far from home. Breathe through the arms of their branches. The earth will swallow your tears while the dead sing, no more, never again, remember me. For the wounded ones and those who receive them back, let there be someone ready when the memories come, when the scars pull and the buried metal moves. And forgiveness for those of us who were not there for our ignorance. And in us, veterans in a forest of 1,000 fallen promises, let new leaves of protest grow on our stumps. Give us courage to answer the cry of humanity's pain, and with our bare hands, out of full hearts, with all our intelligence, let us create the peace. Blessed be, and amen. Some Jewish rules for living from the book of Ecclesiasticus. Number 1, respect yourself.
My child, in all modesty, keep your self-respect and value yourself at your true worth. For who will speak up for you if you are your own enemy? Who will respect you if you disagree? Disparage yourself.
But be honest about your shortcomings too.
Have a proper sense of your own ignorance, and never be ashamed to admit your mistakes. The greater you are, the humbler you will be.
Be careful who you listen to.
Accept a greeting from everyone, but advice only from 1 in 1,000.
And be thoughtful also in what you say.
A kind word counts for more than a rich present. Before you speak, learn. Speak, it is your privilege, but come to the point and don't interrupt the music.
Speaking of music, please join me in singing the doxology printed in your order of service. You may remain seated for this. That's a hard act to follow. Thank you for that. Expectations are, well, what are they? Are expectations mostly a good thing or a bad thing? On the plus side, we know that children often do better. They work harder, they practice longer, they study more when their teachers or parents have high expectations of them. Psychologist Robert Rosenthal did some research in the 1960s. He tested children at a school at the beginning of the school year with a test that he told the teachers would measure academic blooming. I have very low-tech visual aids, so anyway. So he told them the test would measure academic blooming. That is, it would reveal which students were expected to begin a year of academic achievement. And the teachers in the school, 18 of them in all, were told which students fit that category. And all the students were tested at the end of the year to see how much they bloomed or improved. What the teachers didn't know was that the kids they were told would bloom were assigned to that category at random. There was actually no reason to think these particular kids would do any better than the others. But the teachers thought they would, and a lot of those kids did. Now, it tended to happen more with the younger children, especially those in first and second grade. But still, it's pretty interesting that teachers and probably other adults can affect a child's behavior or success by the expectations they have. As it turns out, this works with rats too. Before Rosenthal did his research on teachers and their students, he did an experiment on psychology students and their lab rats. He told his students that there were two groups of rats. One group had been bred to be good at running through mazes and finding the cheese. These rats were called Maze Bright. And the second group of rats was not supposed to be good at this. They were called Maze Dull. So Maze Bright, Maze Dull. Actually, all the rats were just standard lab rats. But the rats that the students thought were Maze Bright did learn the mazes more quickly than the Maze Dull ones. Apparently, the students had unconsciously influenced the rats by their expectation. This is now called the experimenter expectancy effect. Rosenthal figured there might be a similar effect with teachers, which is why he did that next study. So if you're dealing with rats or first and second graders, expectations have a real effect. Now, here's a case where someone's expectation of himself had a powerful effect. A mathematician at Stanford, George B. Dantzig, who died several years ago in 2005, once told this story about what happened to him in 1940 when he was a student at Berkeley. He says, during my first year at Berkeley, I arrived late one day at one of Professor Naiman's classes. On the blackboard, there were two problems that I assumed had been assigned for homework. I copied them down. A few days later, I apologized to Naiman for taking so long to do the homework. The problem seemed to be a little harder to do than usual. I asked him if he still wanted it. He told me to throw it on his desk. I did so reluctantly because his desk was covered with such a heap of papers that I feared my homework would be lost there forever. About 6 weeks later, one Sunday morning about 8 o'clock, my wife and I were awakened by someone banging on our front door. It was Professor Naiman. He rushed in with papers in hand, all excited. I've just written an introduction to one of your papers. Read it so I can send it out right away for publication. For a minute, I had no idea what he was talking about. To make a long story short, the problems on the blackboard that I had solved, thinking they were homework, were in fact two famous unsolved problems in statistics. That was the first inkling I had that there was anything special about them. Now, can you imagine what would have happened if Dantzig had known that the problems on the board had never been solved? He wouldn't have tried them. He wouldn't have tried to do anything with them because he didn't know, because he thought they were just homework, He expected to be able to solve them, and he did. It might be interesting to speculate on what you and I could do if we didn't believe it was out of our league. Now, that's an argument for expectations being a good thing, but expecting children and students to fail can also have a powerful negative effect. And even well-intentioned expectations can sometimes have negative effects. For example, how many people are raised with expectations that they can never fulfill, and they end up feeling like failures? Girls expected to be quiet and unassuming, boys expected to be tough and unemotional. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, wrote about his life in a Nazi concentration camp, and he had this story to tell about a fellow camp resident. Everyone knew that Frankl was a doctor and a psychiatrist, and this particular camp resident came up to him and asked him a question. Incidentally, just so you know, this great book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, was published originally by our Unitarian Universalist press, Beacon Press. So here's what he writes. My senior block warden, a fairly well-known composer and librettist, confided in me one day, "I would like to tell you something, Doctor. I have had a strange dream. A voice told me that I could wish for something, that I should only say what I wanted to know, and all my questions would be answered." What do you think I asked? I asked that I would like to know when the war would be over for me. You know what I mean, Doctor, for me. I wanted to know when our camp would be liberated and our sufferings come to an end. And when did you have this dream, I asked. In February 1945, he answered. It was then the beginning of March. What did your dream voice answer? Furtively, he whispered to me, March 30th. When this man told me about his dream, he was still full of hope and convinced that the voice of his dream would be right. But as the promised day drew nearer, the war news which reached our camp made it appear very unlikely that we would be free on the promised date. On March 29th, this man suddenly became ill and ran a high temperature. On March 30th, the day his prophecy had told him that the war and the suffering would be over for him, he became delirious and lost consciousness. On March 31st, he was dead. To all outward appearances, he had died of typhus. But Frankl argues it was his expectations, his hope. Ironically, the camp was liberated not long afterwards. And if the man hadn't had this particular expectation, he might have made it. There's also been some interesting research done on the effects of alcohol. Now, we all know if you drink a lot of liquor, it has an obvious effect on you, but what if you just have one glass? Let's say 1 part vodka and 4 parts tonic water. In several studies, researchers took a bunch of people and divided them into 4 groups. One group was given vodka and tonic, but they were told that it was just tonic. This is always hard for me to see backwards. All right. One were given vodka and tonic and were told that it was vodka and tonic. And one got tonic and they were told it was tonic. But another got vodka and tonic and were told that it wasn't. And one got tonic and was told that it was vodka. And the people who believed, this is the liars group, the people who believed that they had vodka got high. In other words, the people who got tonic but thought it was vodka got higher than the people who actually had vodka but didn't know it. So expectations can be powerful either positively or negatively, but whether they're negative or positive, they tend to filter reality. They tend to filter reality through our customary ways of viewing the world. Try a little experiment with me. Look at the hymn we sang after the reading, the doxology. Did any of you notice anything strange in the way the words went in the doxology hymn? A few of you, yeah, a couple of you noticed. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, in every land by every tongue. Did anyone notice all of those when you read it? Okay, a few of you, but most of you didn't. All right? Even if you caught some of the oddities your first time through, you probably didn't catch every single one, and that's because we tend to see what we expect to see. And that's actually a good thing most of the time, because it would take a very long time to read anything if we had to go through it slowly enough to catch every possible irregularity. That's why you should never proofread your own material. You will never see your mistakes. So we in general go through life seeing more or less what we expect to see, and we save time that way. But that also means that we tend to get our biases confirmed. Psychologists call this expectation confirmation. We tend to ignore the things that don't fit our already held beliefs, and we look for things that confirm them. Now, at some point, of course, even long-held expectations can be shattered if we have enough evidence. And we've probably all had times in our lives when that has happened to us. But think of all the times we didn't see the truth because we weren't ready to. Think of the people in our own country today who aren't yet ready to see the truth. Expectation confirmation tends to simplify our lives, of course, and if we never knew what to expect, it would take us all a long time to figure anything out. But it can also distort the way we see people and groups, especially ones that are not part of our tribe. A personal example I remember from my college years. Some of you know that I once studied to be a Catholic priest, so I went to a Catholic seminary, high school, college, graduate school, etc. And this was in the late 60s or early 70s. And the seminary was a fairly liberal seminary because I was with the Maryknoll Fathers, and they were very progressive. So they allowed us to have long hair and beards. It took a few years before they allowed that, but when they did that, boy, I sure got that. I looked pretty much the way Jesus Christ would have looked if he'd worn bell-bottoms and paisley shirts. So I basically looked like a hippie. And expectations played a big role in how I was viewed by other people. If someone met me who didn't know I was studying to be a priest, they tended to have a wonderful impression of me once they found out that I was. To them, I looked like a hippie who was more respectful and spiritually responsible than they had expected. They thought, how cool. Here's a hippie who actually cares about the church. But if they were told they were going to meet a seminarian and already had their own expectations of what a priest to be would look like, then when they met me, they said, oh, how far church standards have gone. They're letting their seminarians dress like this. So it was better to be a hippie who was studying to be a priest than a seminarian who dressed like a hippie. It was all about expectations. Now, the problem I have with expectations is that they sometimes, well, quite often in fact, cause me grief in the end, especially when I expect people to act a certain way and they don't. I became very aware of this once when I heard someone talking about what she expected of other people. I think it was, how she expected people to treat her or how she expected them to behave. And suddenly, someone else in the group said, well, you know what expectations are. They're resentments in training. I don't think the person who'd been speaking heard the guy because she just went on about how people were so disappointing. But the comment struck with me because I could see that it was frequently true in my own life, that my expectations are sometimes resentments in training. It's not that they necessarily start out with ill feeling or indignation behind them, but they so often end up there. They so often set me up for that in the end. Here are a few quotations about that you might find interesting. The physicist Stephen Hawking, who died recently, said, "My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus." From the author Donald Miller, "When you stop expecting people to be perfect, you can like them for who they are." And my favorite, "There are 2 ways to be happy: improve your reality or lower your expectations." Incidentally, research has shown that older people tend to be happier, and I suspect it might be because we've given up having all these expectations of things we have to do. We just say, well, whatever. A good example for me was when I was in college, I was on a trip with a bunch of fellow seminarians from the Chicago area. I think it was probably a trip from Chicago to the West Coast for us to get home for our summer vacations. We all lived in the West Coast. And on the way, we stopped to see, I think it was the Carlsbad Caverns. All I remember was that it was sort of like a beautiful and gigantic underground cathedral. That's what it looked like. I'll never forget how awe-inspiring that was. Many years later, someone suggested I should see the Cave of the Mounds here in Wisconsin, near Madison. And someone had told me how cool it was, and in my head I was thinking, I'll bet that's that place I visited years ago. That'll be so cool. Well, it was sort of cool. Not as vast and beautiful as I had remembered, but it was okay. And then our tour guide said, "Okay, before we go into this next chamber, I want all the kids to come forward and close your eyes because I think you will be surprised and amazed by what you see." And my heart skipped a beat because I thought, this must be where the real caves begin. I can hardly wait. So I waited for the kids to go in first and ooh and ah, and then I went in to see, well, not what I was expecting. What I saw was a cave niche, like so many others we'd already seen, only this one had troll dolls in it. That was the big surprise. I don't think I'd ever been as disappointed, except maybe the last presidential election. But the thing is, if I hadn't been expecting something so grand, it probably would have been a great experience. The Cave of the Mounds is cool, but I brought expectations to it that didn't allow me to see that. But I had the opposite experience too. When my husband Craig and I first went to Italy, we decided, I won't point him out to you, but he's here. When we first decided to go to Italy, we decided to go to Venice. And when we got off at the Venice train stop, we expected to take a bus to get to Venice proper. Instead, when we walked out out of the station door, we found ourselves standing on the stairs leading down to the water. We were already there. Because we didn't expect to see Venice so soon, we were overwhelmed by its beauty. A tear came in both of our eyes. I suspect that if and when we go back someday, we won't have that feeling of awe that we did the first time. To this day, I still believe our lack of expectation is part of what made the experience so memorable. In my own family experience, I can tell you that when I was growing up, my parents expected all of us kids to grow up to be good Catholics. We were a very religious family. In fact, my sister went on to become a nun. My brother went on to become a brother. And of course, I went on to study to be a priest. But chinks in the armor began to appear. First, it was my older brother who got divorced. And at that time especially, divorce was a big no-no. And then it was my other brother who not only got divorced, but got married outside of the Catholic Church. And then it was me. Me leaving the Catholic seminary and the Catholic Church, and even joining a different church, and worst of all, it being the Unitarian Universalists, the worst of all possible religions in my parents' eyes. See, just leaving the seminary would have been okay. You know, not everyone makes it to be a priest, but you'd still be a good Catholic, especially after all that Catholic training. And then, okay, he's not going to church, but he can be a fallen away Catholic and he'll see the light later on. But then joining another church, that'll be harder to leave. And then, well, at least it's a more Christian, it's something like the Catholics, maybe Episcopalians, that wouldn't be too bad. Unitarian. It was, eventually someone told my mom, though, to just lower her expectations. She was complaining about her kids getting divorced and remarried and all this stuff. And finally they said, at least your kids haven't killed anybody yet. And my mom got a lot happier when she gave up her expectation of a good Catholic family to carry on. And actually, Mom's lowered expectations helped me in the end too. Because I remember asking her once, Mom, how did you feel when you found out I was gay? Did that bother you? And she said, no. I figured you'd already left Holy Mother Catholic, the Catholic Church. What difference could this make? The Buddha once taught that the cause of most of our suffering is that we want too much. The Sanskrit word he used was tanha, which literally means thirst. It is sometimes translated as desire or greed or addiction, sometimes as clinging or possessiveness or attachment, but its literal meaning is thirst. We thirst for a life that's better than what we have. We thirst for friends who always appreciate us. We thirst for spouses who never disagree. We don't usually say these things overtly, but in our heart of hearts, that's what we find ourselves wanting and expecting. It's a kind of greed, actually, but because it's not necessarily to material things, we don't always recognize it as such. And expectations are often a part of this thirst or greed. We expect our boss or supervisor to thank us for the good job we did, or at least to notice it. And if she doesn't, we're indignant, or at least disappointed. We expect our parents to realize what great offspring we've been. And if they don't tell us that from time to time, or they do tell us but not very convincingly, we feel let down. Or, I expect my sermon to be a big hit wherever I go. And if it's not, or at least I don't hear from enough people to convince me it was, I might feel a little disheartened. Not today, though. Don't worry. On the other hand, expectations like the one that mathematician had, George Danzig, who expected to be able to do what he thought was a homework assignment, but was actually 2 unsolved problems in statistics, reminds us that there may be talents and abilities in us that we haven't discovered because no one ever showed us the possibility, so we never expected to find anything. Now, I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna here. I'm not saying you can achieve anything your heart desires or be anything you want. Only that the last word hasn't been spoken about you yet. That there's no telling what new ideas you might have or talents you'll discover or friends you will come to cherish. So there you have it. Expectations can be powerful. They can be good or bad. They are both convenient and distorting. They are necessary and problematic. I can't tell you not to have any because that's not really possible. I can't tell you to keep them high or low because there are good reasons for both at different times. But what I can suggest is, 1, occasionally stop and notice when you have expectations and what they are bringing to your experience. 2, don't be too attached to them. Expect what you want from yourself or other people, but don't get bent out of shape when you or they don't fulfill them. As someone once said, expectations are like fine pottery. Hold them too tight and they will shatter. And 3, sometimes intentionally engage in an activity without any expectations. For example, a common Buddhist form of meditation is to do something in the present moment without filtering it through labels and concepts and categories. Like, eat something while being completely aware of the experience. Or wash dishes without thought of it as a job or a burden, but just feeling the suds in the water, or feeling your hand and sponge wash over the plate or the bowl or the fork. You might want to even try this after the service today. eat your snack or drink your coffee or tea without preconceptions. Just be here now with whatever you're doing. You don't have to do this all the time. It's not even possible. But once in a while, as a way to remind yourself that what you experience throughout your life is not always what is there, but is what you brought to it. Incidentally, those of you who might remember Jay Leno when he was on The Tonight Show, he had someone go out in an area where there was a lot of foot traffic and people had kiosks and were selling things. And he had this guy there with this machine, and he was trying to get people in, and he said, he had a bunch of little carrot sticks, and he said, now taste this carrot stick. And they tasted it, and they said, now, I'm going to put this carrot stick on this little machine, and it'll jiggle it up and down, and that'll move the atoms and molecules in it, so your taste buds will really experience a different experience. And he did that, and they tasted it, and they went, oh my God, this is amazing. And he said, would you buy something like that? They said, yes, this is wonderful. It's kind of what you expect. That is what you bring. No need to cling to categories and judgments, even if they worked in the past. Don't be, if you're a Star Trek fan, you'll get this, don't be a Klingon. Don't cling. Don't cling. Be willing to be surprised. That's the key to almost all new knowledge. Remember that there will always be pain in our lives, but suffering is sometimes optional. And remember, too, that the greatest obstacle to happiness may be the expectation in your mind of what it's supposed to look like. Good luck.
Every week, we have an opportunity to practice our values through sharing our resources. Our pledges are at the core of our spiritual practice of generosity. In addition, the church shares half of the non-pledged cash in our offering plate with a community organization. In this way, we commit our resources in line with our beliefs that this congregation is interdependent and the world beyond these walls. Today, we share the plate with Kyle's Corner. To contribute, put cash or checks made out to Kyle's Corner. May the practice of giving bring us joy. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Would you rise in body or spirit for the responsive reading printed in your order of service by George Odell. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted.
We need
We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another in the hour of success when we look for someone to share our triumphs. When with encouragement we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us. Join now in singing hymn number 301, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky. Closing words are from the Taoist tradition. In Taoism, you may have seen the yin-yang symbol, symbolizes that all light contains dark, all good contains evil, all lies contain some truth, and all truth contains some lies. For example, if I were to say to you, I'm 50 years old, that would be a lie because I'm much older, but it would reveal a truth that I wish I looked better. All right, so there are lies and truth, all things contain, they're opposite. And in this story, it's about good and bad things happening. The story goes that there was a farmer who had a horse, and one day the horse ran away. And his neighbor came over to him and said, "That's really sad. I'm sorry that your horse ran away. That's really bad." And the farmer said, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" Because he was a good Taoist. And the neighbor thought, well, okay, that's nice, but it's bad when you lose your horse. But you know, the next day, the horse came back with a bunch of other horses it had brought in from the wilderness. And now the farmer was rich. And the neighbor came over and said, "Boy, that sure turned out to be good." And the farmer said, "Well, you know, who knows what's good and what's bad?" And he was thinking, okay, I was wrong the first time, but this is good. This is undeniably good. But you know, the next day, his son started riding one of the horses that had been brought in, and he was thrown off and broke his leg. And the neighbor came over and said, "Well, that sure turned out to be bad." And he says, "Well, who knows what's good and what's bad?" But you know, the next day, the army came by taking young men to fight in a war, and because his son had a broken leg, he didn't have to go. And the neighbor said, "Gee, that sure turned out to be good." And he said, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" We extinguish the flame in this chalice, but the fire and the light goes on in all of us.